Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the cleaning cart down the pristine corridors of Xenobiology Research Station Omega-7. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sterile white glow he'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. Most people would find this job boring, but Marcus had always found peace in routine work. After losing his family in the Centauri mining accident, simple tasks kept his mind from wandering to darker places. The research station orbited Kepler 442b, a planet that had surprised everyone when initial surveys revealed not just life, but intelligent life. The draconian species had been contacted 18 months ago, and the first diplomatic exchanges had gone remarkably well. Unlike the aggressive, fire-breathing monsters from human mythology, these beings were elegant, wise, and surprisingly peaceful. They stood nearly 12 feet tall, with scales that shimmered like oil on water, and possessed an intelligence that made even the brightest human scientists feel inadequate. Marcus had seen a few of them during his shifts. They moved through the station with a grace that seemed to defy physics, their massive forms somehow never bumping into anything or making unnecessary noise. The research team was ecstatic about the cultural exchange program that had been established. 3 draconian scholars had agreed to live on the station for a full year, sharing knowledge about their civilization while learning about humanity. What the researchers didn't know, and what Marcus had accidentally discovered 2 weeks ago, was that one of the draconians was pregnant. It had been during his late-night cleaning shift in the restricted biological wing. Marcus wasn't supposed to be there, but Dr. Chun had specifically requested that someone clean the guest quarters where the draconian stayed. She'd handed him a special access card and told him to be discreet. The draconians valued privacy, especially during their rest periods. Marcus had been quietly mopping the floor outside the main guest suite when he heard it, a low, melodic humming that seemed to vibrate through the walls. He'd paused, thinking perhaps one of the aliens was singing, but the sound was different, more primal, more maternal. Curiosity had gotten the better of him, and he'd peered through the slightly open door. What he saw had taken his breath away. The largest of the 3 draconians, the one the researchers called Zephyra, was curled around what could only be described as a nest. Her massive form created a protective circle, and within that circle, Marcus could see a large, opalescent egg. The shell seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and Zephyra was humming to it, her voice creating harmonies that no human throat could produce. Marcus had quickly retreated, his heart pounding. He'd finished his cleaning duties in record time, and never mentioned what he'd seen to anyone. It wasn't his place to intrude on such an intimate moment. But now, 2 weeks later, something had changed. The egg had hatched. Marcus first noticed the difference when he arrived for his morning shift. There was a new energy in the air, a subtle vibration that seemed to make the very walls of the station hum with excitement. The research team was in chaos. Not the bad kind, but the barely controlled excitement of scientists who had just witnessed something unprecedented. Dr. Chen found him as he was preparing his cleaning supplies. She was practically bouncing on her toes, her usually perfectly arranged hair disheveled from running her hands through it. "Marcus, I need to ask you to be extra careful today," she said, trying to contain her excitement. "We've had a development. The Draconians have informed us that they've welcomed a new member to their group. A hatchling." Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Of course, Doctor. Should I avoid the guest quarters?" "Actually, no. They've specifically requested that station operations continue as normal. They don't want to disrupt our routines. But please, if you see anything unusual, don't approach. Just contact me immediately." As Dr. Chun hurried away, Marcus couldn't help but smile. If only she knew that he'd been keeping their secret for weeks. His first encounter with the hatchling came 3 hours later. Marcus was cleaning the observation deck, a large transparent dome that offered a spectacular view of Kepler 442b below. The planet's surface was a swirling mass of purple and gold clouds, with occasional breaks that revealed vast oceans of what appeared to be liquid mercury. It was beautiful in an alien way, and Marcus often found himself pausing to stare at it during his cleaning rounds. He was wiping down the viewing windows when he heard it, a sound like wind chimes mixed with a cat's purr. He turned around and froze. Standing in the doorway of the observation deck was the most beautiful creature Marcus had ever seen. The hatchling was about the size of a large dog, but built like a miniature version of its mother. Its scales were a brilliant silver that shifted to blue and green as it moved, and its eyes were large and expressive, filled with an intelligence that seemed far too advanced for something so young. Small wings were folded against its back, not yet large enough for flight, but perfectly formed nonetheless. What struck Marcus most was the way it was looking at him, not with the curiosity of a wild animal, but with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle it. "Are you lost?" The hatchling tilted its head, much like a dog might when hearing an interesting sound. Then, to Marcus's amazement, it took a step forward. Marcus remained perfectly still as the young dragon approached. He'd read enough about animal behavior to know that sudden movements could be interpreted as threats. The hatchling circled him slowly, its head moving up and down as if it was taking his measure. When it completed its circle, the hatchling sat down directly in front of Marcus and made that wind chime sound again. "I wish I knew what you were trying to tell me," Marcus said with a gentle smile. The hatchling's response was to stand up and walk over to Marcus's cleaning cart. It sniffed at the various supplies, then looked back at Marcus expectantly. "Oh, you want to know what I do?" Marcus asked, feeling slightly ridiculous for carrying on a conversation with a creature that couldn't possibly understand him. But those intelligent eyes seemed to indicate otherwise. Marcus picked up his spray bottle and demonstrated on a nearby panel. "I clean things. Keep the station tidy." He moved slowly and deliberately, narrating his actions as if he were training a new employee. The hatchling watched every movement with intense focus. When Marcus finished cleaning the panel, the young dragon approached and sniffed at the spot where he'd worked. It looked back at Marcus and made an approving sound. "You like clean things, huh?" Marcus chuckled. "Well, you're welcome to watch, but I don't think your mother would appreciate you getting too close to these chemicals." As if summoned by the mention of its mother, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor. Marcus quickly stepped away from the hatchling, not wanting to be caught in what might be seen as an inappropriate interaction. Zephyra appeared in the doorway, her massive form filling the entrance. Marcus had never been this close to her before, and he was struck by her sheer presence. She was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Her scales seemed to shift color based on her mood, and right now they were displaying patterns Marcus couldn't interpret. She looked at her offspring, then at Marcus, then back at her offspring. The hatchling made a series of sounds that were clearly some form of communication, and Zephyr's response was a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within her chest. Marcus bowed slightly, having learned that this was considered respectful among draconian culture. "I'm sorry if I was disturbing your little one. I was just doing my cleaning duties." Zephyra's great head turned toward him, and Marcus found himself looking directly into eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. She studied him for a long moment, then made a sound that was almost musical. To Marcus's surprise, she didn't immediately collect her offspring and leave. Instead, she settled into a resting position near the doorway, clearly intending to stay and observe. The hatchling, apparently taking this as permission, trotted back over to Marcus and resumed its inspection of the cleaning cart. Is it okay if I continue working?" Marcus asked, feeling awkward about the whole situation. Zephyr's response was another musical sound, which Marcus interpreted as approval. For the next hour, Marcus continued his cleaning duties with the most unusual supervision he'd ever experienced. The hatchling followed him around the observation deck, watching his every move with the intensity of a scholar studying an ancient text. Whenever Marcus paused to explain what he was doing, the young dragon would tilt its head and make soft sounds that almost seemed like responses. Zephyra watched it all from her position near the door, occasionally making comments in her own language that seemed directed at her offspring. When Marcus finished cleaning the observation deck, he packed up his supplies and prepared to move to the next area on his schedule. The hatchling, however, had other ideas. As Marcus headed toward the door, the young dragon positioned itself directly in his path and sat down. "I think your little one wants to come with me," Marcus said to Zephyra, not sure if she could understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. Zephyra's response was a long, complex series of sounds directed at her offspring. The hatchling replied with its own musical chirps, and what followed was clearly a conversation between mother and child. Marcus waited patiently, fascinated by this glimpse into draconian family dynamics. The exchange went on for several minutes, with both voices rising and falling in what seemed like negotiation. Finally, Zephyra turned to Marcus and made a sound that was different from any he'd heard before. It was lower, more formal, and carried a weight that suggested significance. The hatchling immediately perked up and trotted over to Marcus's side, looking up at him expectantly. "I think that means yes," Marcus said, still not entirely sure what he was agreeing to. As they left the observation deck together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. The hatchling walked beside him with a confidence that suggested this was exactly where it belonged, and Zephyra followed at a distance, her presence both protective and approving. Word of the unusual arrangement spread quickly through the research team. Within hours, Marcus found himself the subject of intense scientific interest. Dr. Chen appeared at his side multiple times throughout the day, clipboard in hand, asking questions about the hatchling's behavior and taking notes on every interaction. "This is unprecedented," she kept saying. "Dragons don't typically form attachments outside their immediate family groups. The fact that this hatchling has chosen to bond with a human is, well, it's revolutionary." Marcus tried to explain that he didn't think it was a bond so much as curiosity, but Dr. Chen wasn't listening. She was too busy documenting every sound the hatchling made and every gesture it directed toward Marcus. The young dragon, for its part, seemed completely unbothered by the attention. It continued to follow Marcus through his duties, watching him work and occasionally investigating interesting objects with the thoroughness of a quality inspector. When Marcus's shift ended, he faced an unexpected dilemma. The hatchling had been with him for nearly 8 hours and showed no signs of wanting to leave his side. "What do I do now?" he asked Dr. Chun. "I can't exactly take it home with me." Dr. Chun consulted her tablet, scrolling through pages of notes she'd taken throughout the day. According to draconian custom, when a hatchling chooses a guardian outside the family, the choice is considered sacred. The mother has clearly approved of this arrangement, or she wouldn't have allowed it to continue. "Guardian," Marcus felt a flutter of panic. "I don't know anything about taking care of a dragon." "None of us do," Dr. Chen admitted. "This is entirely new territory. But Zephyra has been very cooperative in answering our questions about hatchling care. She's provided us with dietary information, sleeping habits, even play preferences." As if summoned by the conversation, Zephyra appeared at the end of the corridor. She approached with her usual grace, and Marcus noticed that she was carrying something in her massive claws. She stopped in front of Marcus and carefully set down what appeared to be a bundle of soft, silvery fabric. She made a series of sounds to her offspring, who responded with excited chirping. "I think she's giving you supplies," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice filled with awe. Zephyra then did something that took both humans completely by surprise. She approached Marcus directly and lowered her great head until they were at eye level. Her massive hand reached out and gently touched his shoulder, and she made a sound that was unmistakably one of gratitude. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing there with a dragon hatchling at his feet and a bundle of alien fabric in his hands. "I think," Dr. Chen said slowly, that you'd just been officially appointed as the first human dragon sitter in history. Marcus looked down at the hatchling, who looked back up at him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. The young dragon made a soft, contented sound and leaned against his leg. Despite all his uncertainty about what he'd gotten himself into, Marcus couldn't help but smile. For the first time since the accident that had taken his family, he felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving each day. "Well, little one," he said to the hatchling, "I guess we're going to figure this out together." The hatchling's response was a happy chirp that seemed to echo through the entire corridor, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. 3 weeks had passed since the hatchling had chosen Marcus as its guardian, and life aboard Xenobiology Research Station Omega 7 had taken on an entirely new rhythm. What had started as scientific curiosity had evolved into something that none of the researchers had anticipated, a genuine interspecies family bond that was rewriting everything they thought they knew about draconian culture. Marcus had named the hatchling Spark, though he suspected the young dragon had its own name that he simply couldn't pronounce. The name had come to him during their second week together, when he'd been repairing a malfunctioning maintenance panel. Spark had been watching with its usual intense focus when suddenly the panel had shorted out, sending sparks flying across the corridor. Instead of being frightened, the hatchling had danced around the electrical display with pure joy, chirping and trying to catch the glowing fragments with its tiny claws. "You like sparks, don't you?" Marcus had said, laughing at the display. The hatchling had immediately turned to him and made a sound that seemed distinctly affirmative. From that moment on, it had responded to the name as if it had always been its own. The living arrangements had required some creative problem-solving. Station regulations didn't exactly have provisions for housing dragon hatchlings, but Zephyra had provided detailed instructions through the translation protocols. Spark needed a warm, elevated sleeping space, access to specific mineral supplements, and, most importantly, constant companionship during its first few months of life. In draconian culture, hatchlings were never left alone during their critical bonding period. Dr. Chun had arranged for Marcus to move into a larger quarters module adjacent to his regular room, complete with a specially constructed roosting platform for Spark. The platform was made from materials that Zephyra had specifically requested, metals with high copper content that would help regulate the hatchling's developing electromagnetic sense, and crystals that would aid in scale development. What surprised everyone was how quickly Spark adapted to human schedules and customs. Dragon hatchlings were typically active during their planet's longer day cycle, which lasted nearly 30 Earth hours. But Spark had somehow adjusted to the station's 24-hour rhythm, sleeping when Marcus slept and being active during his work shifts. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Chun explained to the visiting xenobiologist who had arrived to study the unusual bonding. "We expected significant behavioral conflicts, but the hatchling has essentially restructured its entire biological rhythm to match its chosen guardian." Dr. Sarah Okafor, the visiting specialist, was equally amazed. She'd spent years studying interspecies relationships, but nothing in her research had prepared her for what she was observing. The level of adaptability suggests an intelligence that's far more advanced than we initially believed. This hatchling isn't just following Marcus around out of imprinting. It's making conscious choices about how to integrate into human society. Marcus found the scientific analysis interesting, but his relationship with Spark had moved far beyond academic curiosity. The young dragon had become his constant companion, and their bond had developed into something that felt remarkably similar to the relationship between a parent and child. Spark had its own personality, which became more apparent each day. The hatchling was curious about everything, often getting into minor trouble by investigating equipment it shouldn't touch. It was also incredibly empathetic, seeming to sense Marcus's moods and responding accordingly. On days when Marcus felt melancholy, usually when memories of his lost family surfaced, Spark would stay closer than usual, making soft, comforting sounds and occasionally nuzzling against his hand. The young dragon was also proving to be remarkably helpful. Its electromagnetic sense allowed it to detect equipment malfunctions before human instruments could register them. Twice, Spark had led Marcus to failing systems that could have caused serious problems if they'd gone unnoticed. The hatchling would position itself near the faulty equipment and make a specific sound that Marcus had learned meant something wrong here. It's like having a living diagnostic tool. Marcus had joked to Dr. Chun, but the observation had serious implications for the research team. The other two Draconian scholars, Morpheus and Titan, had watched the developing relationship with what could only be described as amazement. Through the translation protocols, they'd explained that nothing like this had ever been recorded in their species' history. Hatchlings occasionally bonded with non-parent adults within their own species, but never with beings from another world entirely. This suggests possibilities we never considered. Morpheus had communicated during one of the formal interview sessions. Perhaps the barriers between species are not as absolute as we believed. Zephyr's role in the arrangement was equally fascinating. She maintained a careful balance between allowing Spark its independence and ensuring her offspring's well-being. She visited daily, usually timing her appearances to coincide with Marcus's break periods. During these visits, she would communicate with Spark in their musical language, clearly checking on its health and happiness. What touched Marcus most deeply was that Zephyra had begun including him in these conversations. She would make sounds to Spark, then turn to Marcus and make different sounds as if translating or including him in the discussion. The translation protocols couldn't handle the complexity of these interactions, but the intent was clear. She considered Marcus to be part of her family unit. The breakthrough in their relationship came during Marcus's 4th week as Spark's guardian. He was working in the Environmental Systems Bay, performing routine maintenance on the air recycling units, when the station's emergency klaxons began blaring. All personnel to emergency stations, came the announcement over the comm system. Hull breach in Section 7. Repeat, hull breach in Section 7. Marcus immediately began securing his equipment, muscle memory from his training taking over. But as he moved toward the emergency station, he realized that Spark hadn't followed him. The hatchling was standing near one of the air recycling units, making urgent sounds and pawing at the access panel. "Spark, we need to go," Marcus said, but the dragon refused to move. Instead, it became more agitated, its scales shifting to colors that Marcus had learned indicated distress. Following his instincts, Marcus approached the unit that had captured Spark's attention. At first glance, everything appeared normal. All the indicator lights showed green, and the system readouts were within normal parameters. But Spark continued its urgent calling, now adding a high-pitched whine that Marcus had never heard before. Trusting the hatchling's electromagnetic sense, Marcus ran a full diagnostic on the unit. The initial scan showed nothing unusual, but when he dug deeper into the system's memory core, he found something that made his blood run cold. The unit's failsafes had been compromised. A microfracture in the primary processing chamber was being masked by falsified sensor readings. If the unit had continued operating under emergency load conditions, which would have been required to compensate for the hull breach in Section 7, it would have catastrophically failed within minutes. The resulting explosion would have taken out the entire environmental system, turning a manageable emergency into a station-killing disaster. Marcus immediately contacted the bridge. "Emergency services, this is Marcus Chun in Environmental Bay. I have a critical failure in Air Recycling Unit 7 Alpha. The unit needs to be taken offline immediately." "Negative, Marcus. We need all units online to compensate for the Section 7 breach. The unit is about to explode," Marcus said, his voice rising. "The failsafes are compromised. If you bring it to emergency load, you'll lose the entire environmental system." There was a pause, then Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came over the comm. "How do you know this?" "All our readings show the unit is functioning normally." Marcus looked at Spark, who was now sitting quietly beside the unit, its scales showing the satisfied purple that indicated a problem solved. "I have a very reliable source." 20 minutes later, After the unit had been safely shut down and the engineering team had confirmed Marcus's assessment, he found himself in Captain Martinez's office. The captain was a stern woman in her 50s who had commanded the station since its construction. She wasn't known for patience with irregularities in procedure. "Explain to me how a janitor detected a system failure that our best diagnostic equipment missed," she said without preamble. Marcus had known this conversation was inevitable, but he still wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding insane. "The dragon hatchling that's been staying with me has an electromagnetic sense that's far more sensitive than our instruments. It detected the microfracture and the sensor falsification." Captain Martinez stared at him for a long moment. "You're telling me that a baby alien saved this station?" "Yes, ma'am." The captain turned to Dr. Chun, who had been called in to provide scientific context. "Is this possible?" Dr. Chun nodded enthusiastically. "More than possible. Draconian electromagnetic sensitivity is one of their most remarkable traits. Adult draconians can detect magnetic fields at the quantum level. We assumed that hatchlings wouldn't develop this ability until maturity, but clearly we were wrong. And this hatchling is living with one of our maintenance workers?" "The arrangement was approved by the Draconian delegation," Dr. Chun said carefully. "It's considered a great honor in their culture." Captain Martinez looked back at Marcus. "How long have you been able to communicate with this creature?" "It's not really communication," Marcus admitted. "More like partnership. I've learned to read its body language and sounds. When it's telling me something is wrong, I listen. And it saved the station." "Yes, ma'am." The captain leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. "Dr. Chun, I want a full report on this hatchling's capabilities. If these creatures can detect equipment failures that our sensors miss, that has significant implications for station safety." She turned to Marcus. "As for you, effective immediately, you're being reassigned. I'm creating a new position, Interspecies Liaison Specialist. Your job will be to work with your dragon partner to conduct safety inspections throughout the station." Marcus felt his mouth drop open. "Ma'am, I don't have any qualifications for that kind of position." "You have the only qualification that matters," the captain replied. "You've earned the trust of a being whose abilities could save all our lives. I'd say that makes you uniquely qualified." Later that evening, Marcus sat in his new quarters with Spark curled up on its roosting platform. The hatchling was making soft, contented sounds as it settled in for the night. The events of the day still felt surreal to Marcus. In the span of a few hours, he'd gone from being a maintenance worker to holding what was essentially the most important job on the station. "What do you think, Spark?" he asked the young dragon. "Ready to be an official member of the safety team?" Spark's response was a sleepy chirp that sounded distinctly affirmative. A soft chime at his door announced a visitor. Marcus opened it to find Zephyra standing in the corridor. She was carrying another bundle, this one larger and more elaborate than the bedding she'd brought weeks earlier. She entered the quarters and approached Spark's platform, making gentle sounds to her offspring. Spark stirred and responded with happy chirps, clearly pleased to see its mother. Zephyra then turned to Marcus and held out the bundle. When he took it, he could feel that it was surprisingly heavy for its size. Carefully unwrapping the silvery fabric, Marcus revealed what appeared to be some kind of harness or vest, made from the same metallic materials as Spark's roosting platform. Zephyra made a series of sounds, then gestured toward Spark and then toward Marcus. The meaning was clear. This was equipment for their partnership. "Thank you," Marcus said, bowing in the draconian fashion. This is an incredible honor." Zephyra's response was the low, formal sound she'd made on that first day, when she'd given permission for Spark to accompany Marcus. But this time, she added something new, a sequence of musical notes that seemed to carry deep meaning. Through the translation unit on the wall, her words came through. "You have proven worthy of the gift my offspring saw in you from the beginning. In our culture, such bonds are considered blessed by the ancient powers. You're no longer just a guardian. You're family." As Zephyra left, Marcus looked down at the harness in his hands, then at Spark, who was watching him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. "Family," Marcus repeated softly. For the first time since losing his wife and daughter, the word didn't bring pain. Instead, it brought hope. Spark made a soft sound and extended one of its small claws toward him. Marcus reached out and gently touched it with his finger, and in that moment he understood that his life had taken a turn he never could have imagined. Tomorrow, they would begin their new job as the station's first interspecies safety team. But tonight, Marcus was content to simply be part of a family again, even if it was a family unlike any other in the galaxy. The future was full of unknowns, but for the first time in years, Marcus was looking forward to discovering what it would bring. 6 months after their first meeting, Marcus and Spark had become the most efficient safety inspection team in the station's history. What had begun as an emergency arrangement had evolved into a perfectly synchronized partnership that was drawing attention from across human space and beyond. The specialized harness that Zephyra had provided had turned out to be far more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. Made from bioresponsive materials that interfaced directly with Spark's developing electromagnetic organs, it amplified the young dragon's natural abilities while providing real-time data translation that Marcus could understand through a heads-up display integrated into his modified maintenance goggles. When Spark detected an anomaly, the harness would translate the dragon's electromagnetic readings into visual and audio cues that Marcus could interpret. A red pulse meant critical failure imminent. Yellow indicated developing problems that needed attention within days. Green meant all systems optimal. But the system was far more nuanced than simple color coding. It could indicate the specific type of problem, its likely location within a system, and even suggest potential solutions based on draconian engineering principles. The partnership had prevented no fewer than 17 potential disasters in the past 6 months, ranging from minor equipment failures to what could have been catastrophic structural collapses. Word of their success had reached Earth itself, and Marcus found himself fielding requests for interviews from journalists and xenobiologists throughout human space. But the real transformation had been in Spark itself. The hatchling had grown considerably, now standing nearly 3 feet at the shoulder and beginning to develop the elegant proportions that would characterize its adult form. Its scales had deepened to a rich blue-green with silver highlights that seemed to dance in certain light conditions. Small horn buds were developing above its eyes, and its wings, while still too small for true flight, were large enough for impressive gliding displays. More importantly, Spark's intelligence was developing at a rate that astounded the research team. Dr. Chun had documented what appeared to be complex reasoning abilities, advanced problem-solving skills, and even what might be the beginnings of technological innovation. Spark had begun modifying simple tools to better suit its anatomy, and had even suggested improvements to some of the station's systems through its interactions with Marcus. It's not just learning, Dr. Okafor had explained during her latest report to the Council for Xenobiological Research. It's innovating. This hatchling is developing hybrid solutions that combine human engineering concepts with draconian biotechnology principles. We're witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of interspecies cooperation. The relationship between Marcus and Spark had deepened as well. What had started as mutual curiosity had become genuine affection and trust. They communicated through a combination of learned gestures, vocal cues, and what Marcus could only describe as intuitive understanding. Sometimes he would know what Spark needed or wanted before the dragon had even expressed it, and Spark seemed equally attuned to Marcus's moods and needs. The other draconian scholars had taken to consulting with Marcus and Spark on matters that went far beyond simple safety inspections. Morpheus had requested their help in designing improved habitat modules that would better accommodate draconian physiology while remaining compatible with human life support systems. Titan had asked for their assistance in developing new translation protocols that could handle the more subtle aspects of draconian communication. Even more significantly, other members of the draconian delegation had begun arriving at the station specifically to observe the unprecedented partnership. Zephyra had explained that the bond between Marcus and Spark was being discussed in the highest levels of Draconian society, with some considering it a sign of great importance for the future of interspecies relations. The challenge came when Admiral Harrison arrived for an unannounced inspection. Admiral Harrison was the head of Xenobiological Defense, a new military division created in response to humanity's first contacts with alien species. While the Draconians had proven peaceful, Earth's government remained concerned about potential future encounters with less friendly aliens. Harrison's mandate was to ensure that all human outposts were prepared for any eventuality. He arrived aboard the heavy cruiser Vigilant with a full diplomatic escort and enough firepower to level a small planet. His first act was to request a complete briefing on all station operations, with particular emphasis on the alien integration protocols. Captain Martinez had tried to prepare Marcus for the meeting, explaining that Admiral Harrison came from the old school of military thinking that viewed any non-human intelligence as a potential security threat. Just stick to the facts, she'd advised. Don't get drawn into philosophical discussions about interspecies bonding. Harrison is interested in capabilities and potential risks. The briefing took place in the station's main conference room, with the senior staff, visiting researchers, and the Draconian delegation in attendance. Marcus wore his formal maintenance supervisor uniform, while Spark sat beside him wearing the ceremonial version of its harness that Zephyra had provided for official occasions. Admiral Harrison was a tall, gray-haired man with the kind of bearing that suggested he'd spent his entire career preparing for conflicts that might never come. He listened to the technical briefings with professional attention, asked pointed questions about station defenses, and nodded approvingly at the research findings. But when Captain Martinez introduced Marcus and Spark, the Admiral's demeanor changed noticeably. "So, you're the janitor who's been playing house with the alien," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a compliment. "I prefer interspecies liaison specialist," Marcus replied evenly, "and Spark is my partner, not a pet." "Partner?" Harrison looked at Spark with undisguised suspicion. "And what exactly does this partnership entail?" Marcus explained their safety inspection procedures, their success rate in preventing equipment failures, and the technological innovations that had emerged from their collaboration. He kept his tone professional and focused on measurable results. Harrison listened without comment, then turned to Dr. Chun. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, what are the security implications of allowing an alien creature unrestricted access to our most sensitive systems?" Dr. Chun had clearly anticipated this question. "Admiral, Spark has been instrumental in improving our security, not compromising it. The electromagnetic detection capabilities have identified vulnerabilities that our own systems missed." "That's not what I asked," Harrison said sharply. "I want to know what this creature could potentially do if it decided we were enemies instead of friends." The question created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Marcus felt Spark shift beside him, the dragon scales taking on the muted colors that indicated stress. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "with respect, that question could be asked about any member of this crew. Anyone with access to station systems could potentially cause damage if they chose to do so. The difference is that Spark has consistently chosen to protect us." "Chosen?" Harrison repeated. "Based on what? Alien instincts? Programming we don't understand? What happens when this creature grows up and decides humans aren't as interesting as they used to be?" Before Marcus could respond, Zephyra rose from her position at the back of the room. When she spoke, her voice carried a formal weight that commanded attention. "Admiral Harrison," came the translation through the comm system, "your concerns reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of what you are witnessing. The bond between Marcus and my offspring is not based on convenience or temporary interest. It is what we call soul singing, a connection that transcends species and cannot be broken by time or circumstance." "And how can we verify that?" Harrison asked. "How do we know this isn't some form of alien manipulation designed to gain her trust?" Zephyr's response was a sound that the translation system couldn't handle, something that was part music, part vibration, and part emotional expression that seemed to bypass human language entirely. When she spoke again, her words carried a weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. You verify it by understanding what you have been given. My offspring chose your Marcus before it had even learned to fly, before it knew what a human was, before it could distinguish between friend and enemy. It chose him because it recognized something that your science cannot measure, the quality of soul that would protect rather than exploit, nurture rather than control. She gestured toward Marcus and Spark with one massive clawed hand. What you see is a security risk. We see as the first step toward a future where our species stand together against the true threats that exist in the galaxy. True threats? Captain Martinez asked. Morpheus stood and activated a holographic display that showed a star map extending far beyond human-explored space. We have not shared this information before, as we did not wish to create alarm. But there are other species among the stars. Not all of them share our peaceful inclinations. The map showed the location of human space, Draconian territory, and several other regions marked with symbols that clearly indicated different alien civilizations. The Void Runners, Titan added through the translation system. The Hive Collective, the Iron Dominion. All of these have technologies that far exceed your current capabilities, and none of them view smaller civilizations as equals to be negotiated with. Admiral Harrison leaned forward, his expression sharpening. Are you saying we're under threat from these species? Not immediately, Zephyr replied. But inevitably, the galaxy is not large enough to hide in forever. When contact comes, it will be essential that our species present a unified front. She gestured again toward Marcus and Spark. This bond, this partnership, this soul singing between our kinds, it is not just a curiosity for your scientists to study. It is proof that such unity is possible. It is hope for a future where our combined strengths can face whatever challenges await us. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Finally, Admiral Harrison spoke. You're talking about a military alliance. We're talking about survival, Morpheus replied. Yours and ours. Harrison studied the star map for a long moment, then turned back to Marcus and Spark. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from suspicion to calculation. This partnership of yours, could it be replicated? Could we train other humans to work with Draconian partners? Marcus looked down at Spark, who was watching the proceedings with the same intense focus it brought to safety inspections. I don't think it's something that can be trained, he said slowly. Spark chose me for reasons I still don't completely understand. But, yes, I think it could happen again. If the conditions were right. If both sides were open to it. How long would it take to develop such partnerships? Zephyra answered before Marcus could speak. A generation, perhaps two. Hatchlings must bond early in life, and the process cannot be rushed or forced. But it is possible. Admiral Harrison nodded slowly. Then, I think we need to have a very different conversation about the future of human-Draconian relations. As the meeting continued, Marcus found himself thinking about how much his life had changed since that first day when a curious hatchling had wandered into the observation deck. What had started as a simple job cleaning corridors had become something that might reshape the future of two civilizations. Spark made a soft sound and gently touched his hand with one claw. Looking into the dragon's intelligent eyes, Marcus realized that perhaps this had always been the plan. Perhaps Zephyra had known from the beginning that her offspring would choose him, and had allowed it because she could see a future that none of the humans had imagined. The idea should have been overwhelming, but instead, Marcus felt a sense of calm certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Spark would face them together, and maybe, just maybe, they would help build a future where humans and dragons stood as equals among the stars. 1 year after that first fateful meeting in the observation deck, Marcus stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned exploration vessel Unity, watching as they approached the edge of known space. Spark, now nearly adult-sized and magnificent in its fully developed form, stood beside him, its scales shimmering with patterns that indicated excitement and anticipation. The Unity represented everything that the partnership between humans and Draconians could achieve. The ship itself was a marvel of hybrid engineering, combining human innovation with Draconian biotechnology in ways that neither species could have accomplished alone. Bioneural networks grown from Draconian tissue interfaced seamlessly with human quantum processors. Living hull sections that could self-repair were protected by force fields generated through technology that married human physics with Draconian electromagnetic manipulation. Most importantly, the ship was crewed by 12 human-dragon partnerships, each pair selected and trained based on the protocols that Marcus and Spark had helped develop. The selection process had been rigorous and sometimes heartbreaking. Not every attempted bonding was successful, and the rejection could be traumatic for both species. But when it worked, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Captain Sarah Chun, Dr. Chin's daughter, who had grown up watching her mother study the first human-dragon partnership, stood at the helm with her partner, a young dragon named Comet whose scales shifted between deep purple and silver. The navigation officer, Lieutenant Torres, worked in perfect synchronization with his partner Storm, whose electromagnetic sense could detect gravitational anomalies that human instruments couldn't measure until they were much closer. The entire crew represented the culmination of a year of intensive training, experimentation, and gradual trust building between two species that had learned to see each other not as aliens, but as complementary halves of something greater than either could achieve alone. Admiral Harrison, now the head of the newly formed Interspecies Defense Initiative, had initially been skeptical of the partnership program. But after witnessing the capabilities that human-dragon teams could achieve, he had become one of their strongest advocates. The Unity mission was his idea: send the best-trained partnership crew to investigate the regions of space where the Draconians had detected signs of the hostile species they'd warned about. "Contact in 30 minutes, announced Lieutenant Torres. His partner Storm raised its head from the navigation console, its scales showing the deep blue that indicated focus concentration. Marcus activated his communication link to the rest of the ship. "All partnerships to stations. Remember, we're not here to fight. We're here to gather information and, if possible, make peaceful contact." Through his neural link with Spark, Marcus could feel the dragon's thoughts. Not in words, but in impressions and emotions that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Spark was excited, but cautious, ready for whatever they might encounter, but hopeful that this first contact would set a positive precedent for future encounters. The development of the neural link technology had been one of the most significant breakthroughs of the past year. Unlike the external harness system that Marcus and Spark had originally used, the neural link created a direct interface between human and dragon minds. It wasn't telepathy exactly. Both species maintained their individual thoughts and personalities, but it allowed for an unprecedented level of communication and coordination. "Marcus," Captain Chun called from the helm, "we're getting some unusual readings from Comet. You might want to take a look." Marcus made his way to the front of the bridge, where Comet was exhibiting behavior he'd never seen before. The dragon scales were cycling through colors rapidly, and its electromagnetic organs were producing readings that made the ship's instruments fluctuate wildly. "What is it, Comet?" Marcus asked, placing his hand on the dragon's flank. Through his link with Spark, he could sense that his partner was experiencing similar sensations. The answer came not through words, but through shared impression that both dragons somehow transmitted directly to their human partners. It was the sensation of vast intelligence, of minds so alien that they barely registered as consciousness in any recognizable sense. "Captain," Marcus said urgently, "we need to slow our approach. We're not just encountering another ship. We're approaching something that thinks in ways we've never imagined." Before Captain Chun could respond, the main view screen flickered and was replaced by an image that defied easy description. It wasn't exactly a ship, though it was clearly artificial. It seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly process. The structure was constantly shifting, as if it were being redesigned in real time according to principles that bore no resemblance to either human or draconian engineering. Broadcasting on all frequencies came the voice of communications, Officer Park. No response to standard greeting protocols. Through the neural link, Marcus felt Spark's growing agitation. The dragon was picking up electromagnetic signatures that were unlike anything in its experience. Patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles that neither human nor draconian science had encountered. This is Captain Chun of the exploration vessel Unity. Chun broadcast on all frequencies. We come seeking peaceful contact and mutual understanding. The response, when it came, was not through any communication system they recognized. Instead, it arrived as a direct impression in the minds of every person and dragon on the ship simultaneously, a sensation of vast amusement mixed with something that might have been curiosity. Then, without warning, 3 smaller craft detached from the main vessel. These were more recognizably ship-like, though they moved in ways that seemed to ignore basic physics. They approached the Unity with what could only be described as playful spirals, like dolphins investigating a strange object in their ocean. Energy signatures are spiking, reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice tight with tension. But Storm isn't reading any hostile intent. Marcus felt the same impression through his link with Spark. Whatever these beings were, they didn't seem aggressive, more like scientists encountering an interesting new specimen. The lead vessel came to a stop directly in front of the Unity's main view screen, close enough that details of its construction became visible. The hull seemed to be grown rather than built, with surfaces that flowed like liquid metal while maintaining structural integrity. Symbols or patterns moved across the surface, not painted on, but emerging from within the material itself, as if the ship were a living thing expressing thoughts. Suddenly, Marcus felt a new sensation through his link with Spark, a gentle probing, as if something was trying to understand the nature of their bond. It wasn't invasive or threatening, but it was unmistakably alien, operating according to principles that neither human nor draconian consciousness could fully grasp. "They're scanning the neural links," Marcus announced. "I think they're trying to understand how we communicate with our partners." "Is it dangerous?" Captain Chen asked. Marcus consulted his sensations, trying to interpret what he was feeling through his connection with Spark. "I don't think so. It feels more like academic interest." The scanning sensation intensified for a moment, then suddenly stopped. What followed was a period of silence that stretched for nearly 10 minutes. Then, gradually, a new presence began to make itself known in the shared consciousness of the human-dragon partnerships. It didn't speak in words, or even in the emotional impressions that dragons used. Instead, it communicated in concepts that somehow translated themselves into understanding without passing through language at all. Fascinating was the first impression. 2 separate evolutionary paths that have found confluence. This is unprecedented in our observations. "We're the architects," came the next concept. "We shape space to study the development of consciousness across the galaxy." Your pairing represents something new. Marcus found his voice. "We're explorers seeking to understand the galaxy and our place in it. We hope to build peaceful relationships with other intelligent species." Peace. The concept seemed to puzzle the architects. "You think in terms of conflict and its absence. We think in terms of growth and stagnation. Your partnerships represent evolution in action." Through his neural link, Marcus felt Spark's sudden understanding. The dragon was somehow grasping concepts that human consciousness couldn't quite encompass, then translating them into impressions that Marcus could process. The architects weren't a species in any sense that humans or draconians would understand. They were something that had evolved beyond individual consciousness into a collective intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions. They traveled through the galaxy not as explorers or conquerors, but as gardeners, cultivating the development of consciousness in younger species. "The hostile species you fear," came the next transmission, "are known to us. The Void Runners seek to harvest consciousness for energy. The Hive Collective seeks to absorb all intelligence into their singular purpose. The Iron Dominion seeks to impose order through force. All of these represent evolutionary dead ends. But your partnerships, these suggest new possibilities. Captain Chin stepped forward. Are you saying you can help us against these threats? Help. Another concept that requires translation. There was a pause, during which Marcus felt the presence examining their thoughts more deeply. We do not intervene directly, but we can provide tools for those species that show promise for continued evolution. The lead architect vessel began to transform, its liquid metal hull reshaping itself into something that resembled a massive flower opening. From the center emerged what appeared to be a sphere of pure energy, contained within fields that bent light around them in impossible ways. This contains knowledge, came the transmission, principles of technology and consciousness that will allow your partnerships to reach their full potential. But beware, such knowledge comes with responsibility. Use it wisely, and your species may transcend their current limitations. Use it poorly, and you may join the catalog of civilizations that chose stagnation over growth. The sphere of energy drifted toward the Unity, and Marcus felt every human-dragon partnership on the ship respond to its presence. The knowledge it contained was vast. Principles of biotechnology that could enhance the neural links, engineering concepts that could create ships capable of traveling between dimensions, techniques for expanding consciousness that could allow partnerships to achieve true mental fusion. But underneath the promise was a warning. This was a test as much as a gift. The architect would be watching to see how humanity and the Draconians used what they were given. We understand, Captain Chun said formally. We accept the responsibility that comes with this knowledge. The sphere came to rest in the Unity's cargo bay, and immediately Marcus felt its influence spreading through the ship. The existing neural links deepened and strengthened, allowing human-dragon partnerships to share not just thoughts and emotions, but memories and skills. The ship's bioneural networks began operating with efficiency levels that exceeded their original design specifications. Your next phase of evolution begins now, transmitted the architects. We will observe your progress with interest. Perhaps, in time, you will join us in cultivating consciousness throughout the galaxy. The three smaller vessels began to withdraw, merging back with the main ship. As they did, the architects left them with one final transmission. The hostile species you fear approach the edge of your space. With the tools we have provided, you now have the potential to not just defend yourselves, but to offer them something they have never encountered, the possibility of transcending their limitations through cooperation rather than domination. The choice, as always, will be yours to make. As the architect vessel faded from normal space, disappearing into dimensions that human sensors couldn't track, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Captain Chun standing beside him, her expression mixing awe with determination. "Well, Marcus," she said, "I think you and Spark just became the most important partnership in known space, ready to help save two civilizations." Marcus looked down at Spark, whose scales were now displaying patterns of such complexity and beauty that they seemed to tell stories of futures yet to be written. Through their enhanced neural link, he could feel the dragon's thoughts more clearly than ever before. Excitement at the challenges ahead, determination to protect both their species, and an unshakable confidence in their ability to face whatever was coming together. "Actually," Marcus replied, "I think we just became part of something much bigger than that. But yes, we're ready." As the Unity began its journey back to human space, carrying with it knowledge that would reshape the future of two civilizations, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary path that had brought him here. It had started with a lonely man finding purpose in simple work and a curious hatchling following him through his daily routine. Now, that simple beginning had grown into something that might determine the fate of countless worlds. Through his link with Spark, Marcus felt the dragon's contentment and anticipation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, as partners, as family, and as proof that the barriers between species were not as absolute as anyone had once believed. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But humanity and the Draconians would meet it united, with the strength that came from choosing cooperation over isolation, growth over stagnation, and love over fear. And at the heart of it all would be the memory of a hatchling who had seen something special in a simple human janitor, and a mother who had been wise enough to trust her offspring's judgment. The future was unwritten, but it was theirs to shape.